Do it. Lunch with Brad. Yeah, you want to.
Nice, Brad. It's real nice.
Let's get stuck in your head. Lunch with Brad. All right, we are back for another episode, episode 3. The big 3 of Lunch with Brad. I am your host, Mr. Brad Williams. I'm excited to be back on the air. This is my minimum viable podcast. Every other week, I invite a friend or a group of friends, and we get on and talk about web and tech and really anything I want to, because it's my show, and it's a lot of fun. So definitely check out the previous shows over at lunchwithbrad.com, and you can interact with the hashtag lunchwithbrad. I don't have a Twitter account for this show. I just have my own. So use the hashtag lunchwithbrad. Opinions, topics, feedback, hate mail, what you're having for lunch. I want to hear it all, so send it over. The show live streams on YouTube as well every other Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. But this week, we're actually doing a little bit of a different show. We are doing a pre-record, so it's the day before Thursday, which would be Wednesday. And I'm actually going to be on a plane to beautiful Miami during the show tomorrow. So I want to pre-record it and get it out for all of you. So this is pre-recorded one day early. So hopefully what we talk about is not stale in the next 24 hours. But I'm very excited about my buddy on the show today, Mr. Scott Basgaard.
Hey,
Welcome
dude.
to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell everyone who you are for those that don't know Scott and what you do?
You could probably do a better job than I could.
I don't know if you want me to.
No. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Scott. I've known Brad for a long time. I've been working with Brad over the years. And now I'm currently based in Norway. I work for a company called Decode and basically do a bit of everything. Pretty well-rounded. A lot of WordPress development, doing a lot of WooCommerce stuff these days, a lot of project management, a lot of kind of account management and stuff like that. That's who I am. That's where I work. You can find me at Scott Basgaard on Twitter to see more about what I do. But Brad, again, we go way back, have a lot of good memories.
Yeah.
And
We do.
If you have any questions about me, just ask Brad, actually.
I got plenty of stories.
I actually have that in a lot of my WordPress files, Brad. Tell me about yourself, and I just say, or ask Brad Williams, or ask Williams BA.
So yeah, Scott was actually our second hire at Web Dev Studios, our first kind of back-end developer hire, almost 10 years ago. We're actually coming up on our 10-year anniversary next month. And I believe it was either late 2008 or maybe early 2009 timeframe, somewhere around there.
I think it was like early spring, maybe March or April 2009.
Okay. Yeah.
When I fired off that email.
And Scott came over to the, back then we had a little shack kind of in this beach town, but it was in the winter. So it was a ghost town, basically. So it was this little shanty bungalow, I guess you'd call it, where we were essentially working, starting Web Dev Studios. And Scott always likes to tell the story how he came over all, for his interview, all dressed in a suit and, copies of his resume printed out, ready to really impress. And he walks up to this bungalow of like, what the hell? And I answer and I interview him like in my pajamas. I don't remember that, but
white shirt and flannel pajamas. And
yes,
and, it was fantastic. And I came back.
And you came back.
Look at us now.
Oh man, that's classic. That's old school classic web dev. You're in a suit and I'm in pajamas. And you got the job, so dress to impress. That's what they say.
And a really good decision.
Yeah, and it's funny because this was when we were in New Jersey, and Scott is from New Jersey, so don't let whatever that accent is that's starting to form, don't let that fool you. But I'm definitely picking up an accent more so than I think last time. I think maybe you've been in Norway a little bit too long.
We need to hang out a bit often. I need to practice a little bit here.
You need to get back to your Jersey roots and really. Cool, man. Well, it's great to have you on. It's always fun to chat. It's good to see you. We only get to see each other a few times a year in person now with you being in Norway, since I can never seem to make the trip over there.
One day.
One day. I do want to go. It's on my short list of countries to visit.
Happen.
So It definitely will happen. But let's dive into it. We got some fun topics today. Scott brings an interesting set of skills and passions to the show. So there's a couple of topics that kind of caught my eye. Oh, yeah. I got to have my ship bell. That's my topic bell, Scott, in case you didn't know. But I want to talk about WordPress a little bit. Obviously, we both, kind of grew up with WordPress together. When Web Dev Studios first started, we were using a lot of different platforms to build websites, WordPress being one of them. We've, early on kind of narrowed our focus to exclusively WordPress. But back then, Scott, we were building sites. We were really learning how to build websites on WordPress together. Neither one of us really knew or were experts by any means. We were kind of hacking it up. And
amount of people were experts at that point, right?
Yeah, it was very early. You're talking 2009, so almost 10 years ago, you can imagine. But WordPress just actually hit a pretty big milestone recently, and it's being reported that WordPress is now used on 30% of the top 10 million websites on the entire internet today. And it also has a 60.2% market share of websites whose content management system or CMS is known. So it's a known CMS and not a custom solution on those sites. It has 60% of that CMS market share. So 30% of the internet essentially is running WordPress. That's amazing.
No, that's crazy.
It's truly mind-blowing to think about the number, and this is based off the top 10 million sites. So, that one could argue, well, it's not the entire internet, but I think once you get past the top 10 million sites, you're really getting into the bowels of the World Wide Web and just very kind of probably niche topics and sites out there. So I think it is it's a good stat, and it's a great stat for WordPress. So where do we go from here? Does it keep climbing? Is it gonna flatten out? Is it gonna start dropping? What are your predictions here?
Well, I mean, it's definitely slowed down too, right? So I mean, from our 10 years, right, we've jumped from, I think I want to say when I started, Brad, and we started to go to WordCamps, it was probably around 5% or 7 or something like that. I specifically remember that number. And it went quite quick. And what was the last kind of big figure that was announced or kind of celebrated?
I think the last big one was probably 25. I mean, each year it's announced what that number is, but unless you're hitting one of the bigger milestones like a 20 or 25.
And I guess, and kind of my thoughts on it, or at least what I'm experiencing or seeing, is that WordPress is going to be a part of a lot of things, actually, right? It isn't necessarily even the main thing for everything, right? So all these things it maybe is even more than we think, for example, and it will be maybe not the main platform, but for example, we're doing a lot of cool stuff where WordPress is, even with Gutenberg, WordPress is the editor, for example, right? And internally, these companies maybe are using WordPress with really good Gutenberg editor with blocks, and then that's over the REST API and served through React or Vue, right? And we might not know that that's WordPress, but WordPress is probably going to be a part of a lot of things, just like, for example, maybe Node is, for example, or React and stuff like that, right? So I think its reach is going to go much further. Maybe, I don't know how that's measured, that stat, right? Is it the site is running a vanilla install of WordPress and it serves
it would have to report the fact that it would have to be discoverable that it's WordPress on the front end, right? They're not they're not doing a survey and asking everyone to tell them what they're running. They're scanning these sites and detecting that. So yeah, I think that's a fair point. We've built WordPress sites that are intranets are completely blocked off from the public. Those certainly aren't going to be pulled into stats like this. Private sites, as well as kind of the headless CMS that you kind of alluded to, which has been a buzz for a few years, but I feel like that is even picking up more steam, where WordPress is truly the CMS in the back end, but the front end layer is something like React. Or Node, I guess, is probably the more popular one there. But, that front end layer. So by all means, the reporting would more than likely not pick it up that it is WordPress,
Well, so I think that's the interesting number. I mean, of course, it's really cool that, 30% of these websites are, but I think the reach is maybe there's some unknown reach I'm pretty curious about is where is WordPress going in kind of a part of the stack in a way, not the kind of this site runs on WordPress.
Well, you mentioned Gutenberg too. So Gutenberg being the new kind of content editing experience, I guess is the way to describe it.
Mm.
It's being built as a plugin right now, but the goal is to merge it into WordPress core.
Mm.
And by all accounts, they're trying to get it out in the next major release, which is WordPress 5.0. So
Mm.
with Gutenberg coming into play, which is really a huge change or in terms of how you're going to work with content in WordPress, is that going to ultimately propel WordPress across more sites, or does it have the potential to, scare off some people from WordPress?
That's a good question. Don't know if I know the answer. I think it's it's a good question, but no, I think it's a positive thing. And I guess we already are seeing a lot of, I guess it's the unknown, right? So how will it change WordPress? I don't think we'll know, but it will be pushing it forward. In what direction, I'm not sure.
Yeah, Gutenberg is a very
amazing.
interesting topic because, and I mentioned on the first episode of the show, I don't want this is not going to be a sole WordPress podcast where we literally talk about Gutenberg on every show. But obviously it's going to make sense to chat about it from time to time, and this is one of them. But, Gutenberg is very interesting because there's a lot of things that people are talking about publicly in terms of how it's going to work and how they're going to interact with it and how, they're going to work with clients or their own sites. But there's a lot of uncertainty and some unspoken things, or at least certainly not publicly spoken, that I've seen around how the impact of Gutenberg or the Gutenberg effect and how it can actually impact existing clients. Because essentially everybody has to go to their clients and say, look, this new feature is coming or is here when it's released. And we need to make some major changes to your website to support and utilize this feature. So now you are almost forced into a cost that you were not expecting, or one that you necessarily requested, for better or worse, right? So, I think it'll be very interesting to see how the overall landscape takes that. I don't know. And even talking with some of our clients, we don't know yet. So
no, and you could say, right, like you said, so there is a decision that businesses and stakeholders need to make where, do I want to invest in getting this updated, or is that a choice or a chance to make a choice of maybe let's use something else, right? Because there is a choice that needs to be made. And you could argue, there's the kind of the backwards compatibility plugin and all these things, but there is a decision that needs to be made for companies to say, is this the way we want to go forward?
Yeah. I mean, I was at a local WordPress meetup focused on Gutenberg here in Philadelphia. And the question came up, which was a really good one, of like, how long will the legacy content editor or the plugin, how long will that work, right? And will there be a kind of end of life? And I think initially my default was, well, it will just always work, right? Why would it stop working? But as we got into the conversation, somebody brought up a really great point of, well, that was kind of exactly what was also talked about with the REST API, like, hey, it's going to be on, you can disable it, but now the REST API is actually hooked into some core functionality of WordPress. So if you were to somehow disable the REST API, you would actually break parts of WordPress core. Right. So, at what point does Gutenberg become so intertwined, or will it become so intertwined with WordPress that you can't actually disable it because it needs it to run? Is that going to be another concern? And again, I think this is all speculation.
Yeah, of course, it's fun to talk.
When you got when you got a tool that powers 30% of the internet, this is important stuff. These are important
and especially
questions.
As Brad, you're running a consulting company and dealing with these questions from clients, and they need to make decisions. It's an obvious thing we need to think about. And it is a bit of an unknown, but you tend to lean towards it's going to be okay. And it's going to be great,
I like your positive attitude, Scott. That glass is half full, and I agree. I think it's important to always look at all sides of something. I think what really comes to light here, though, especially around this 30% of the internet, we've never seen a platform on the internet with this much of a dominance ever. Now, people point to things like Flash. Great, yeah, Flash, ruled the internet for a while, but Flash was a technology. Flash was not a platform. So, if there was a platform that was built with Flash that everybody was using, okay, but that's kind of my take on that. So we've never seen this before, where there's this much of a dominance, and we've also never seen a feature like this that's taken so long to create and develop. It's over a year. Gutenberg has been over a year in development. we've never seen a feature with this long of development for WordPress before it's getting merged into core. So it's like, it's uncharted territory across the board. And I think that's what gives me a little bit of concern. Not to say it won't be all right, because I absolutely think it will. I just don't want it to be a total bumpy process. I want it to be well thought out. And I think that's why we're talking about this and why other people are talking about it, right? So that these questions can come up, and we can figure out how to address them together.
I just had the kind of, I haven't thought about this yet, but I don't know if it's necessarily something that I mean, of course you guys are really looking into it, but something that at least at Decode, we're really looking into it being in Europe is this GDPR thing. So GDPR and Gutenberg being thrown at us at the same time. It's like,
hey,
a lot of questioning.
Man, you just, that was the next topic on our list. That was a hell of a segue. But that is, yeah, absolute valid point. So, GDPR, if you're not familiar, the General Data Protection Regulation. And if you're in the business of building or maintaining websites, you should already be familiar with this. If you're not, you got a couple months, but you need to catch up. Essentially, kind of in a nutshell, this is a new Privacy and Protection Act to protect the private data of European Union citizens, the EU. So any country that's a part of the EU, and Norway is not. And yes, I had to look that up because I did not know. I just assumed it was, and it is not.
Well, yeah, on paper it's not.
Yeah, on paper it's not. So apparently this would not affect citizens of Norway, but does it?
For some reason we are. Yeah, it's like literally like everything is EU except on paper we're not the EU.
Okay, so I guess it does affect citizens of Norway, but essentially it's a hardened compliancy of protecting personal data. And personal data, which it's a pretty broad spectrum of the data that they kind of consider personal. The obvious stuff: name, address, social security number, identifying IDs, in other countries, whatever they may have. But it also has some stuff that is kind of, I guess, a little more general that you wouldn't expect, like IP address, even political views. Okay, so apparently political views, they're considering part of that. So essentially there are, it's got to be more of an opt-in system, without getting into too many details in terms of exactly what you have to do. It's essentially an opt-in system allowing them to take your information, but there also has to be a way that they can request it to be removed and deleted and purged and that type of stuff. So there is a deadline, which is coming up in May 25th, 2018, when this has to be in place. And I think what is really interesting is a lot of people, especially people in the United States and countries not part of the EU, I think the initial reaction is, oh, this doesn't pertain to me. And that's not actually true. It's actually any website that is accessible by an EU citizen. So it absolutely could affect you. If you have a website collecting this personal information and someone from Norway goes to your website and registers an account and gives them your first name and last name and address, you are now affected by GDPR. And there are some pretty steep penalties, up to 20 million euro fines if you are not compliant. So, Scott, I mean, what are your thoughts around GDPR? And then maybe we can get into kind of how you're planning to attack it at the
I mean, so it's not necessarily so at Decode, at least we have a few that have taken some classes on what it is and what we need to change internally and how it affects Decode, and they've been doing that for a long time. And now we're doing stuff to actually prepare for this. That's doing documentation on all of our sites, kind of marking what we need to change, and then a game plan for that. I'm not necessarily really involved in that. But I do have a lot of questions and concerns. Again, probably we're gonna be fine. We're gonna do it. But my initial thoughts are like, how will I develop differently, basically? So a lot of my development things, especially around e-commerce, especially around what I'm doing with, for example, I talked to you a little bit about this before the show, but like we have, I'm doing a lot of stuff with microservices and handling orders, and now making sure that the data where it exists is only in one place, for example. And if somebody wanted to get rid of it, that we know and can identify where it is and doesn't live on multiple places. And then it's like, where's it going, right? So you can think, I mean, a lot of stuff, okay, you could say WordPress, but then entering e-commerce and what you're doing with orders and, a lot of things, right? So like what, personalization around what they bought before and recommended items based on this user, right? A lot of things is, again, we'll make it work so that it's a good experience for users, but a lot of stuff is built around it that exists right now. And we haven't thought this way, right? Usually we're just like, let's solve this and store it where we need to and get it and make these things happen.
Yeah.
And now it's like, how do I do that in another way? So I don't know much around like the laws and especially like in Norway, how it affects, Decode as a company and all these things. I'm not really that up to date on that, other than I know that we're doing our best to be compliant. And I don't think come that deadline, that everyone's going to get fined, but we need to work towards being compliant as fast as we can. So I'm curious. I mean, the other thing, Brad, I'm going to ask you too is like, if you take, I don't want to say look at the other side, but I'm actually really curious how this pans out, because there's a ton of websites, and I don't think a lot of people even know what this is, right? So there's going to be a ton of complaints to start with. So I'm curious where this thing goes.
I mean,
people can react.
I mean, on the surface of it, I like the intent, right? The idea of being more kind of accountable as a website owner and operator, more accountable for, someone's personal information. And this is an area I think, especially in the US, we need to take a real hard look at, because it's, at least once every month or two, there's a massive hack from some huge website. And, personal information is leaked, and, we've seen it time and time again. And it seems like while there's damage done to the brands and things like that, it doesn't feel like the companies are really held that accountable for what they've done. I mean, Equifax is a perfect example of, not only was it personal information, it was like extremely sensitive information. Basically, every piece of data you would need to open up a line of credit or a credit card was in the hack, which affected almost every American. So, and it stands to reason that they might actually profit from this overall hack, which is absolutely ridiculous. So I like the intent, right? I think the execution is going, like you said, is going to be the hardest part. And I agree. I don't think they're going to go out and sue, every website under the sun on the day after this is imposed. But what I do think is going to happen is that somebody is going to sue a major website that's based in the U.S. that is not GDPR compliant. And I think that's going to end up going to the courts on whether they can actually hold non-EU based websites and companies accountable for this compliancy, because I don't know that they can, So I think that's actually going to get, I would not be surprised to see that go all the way to the courts. And for them to decide that. Now, I think it makes total sense. If you're in the EU, your business is in the EU. Absolutely. I think it's going to be very hard to hold companies outside of the EU accountable for this. But either way, we're preparing for it, like you are as well. Been doing a lot of research.
Too, like you said, Brad, it's like, where does that, again, I really do like it actually, but just thinking about where this goes, I'm sure that this is already thought about. Where does that bottleneck, right? So say, within the next 6 months, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of reports of US companies not GDPR compliant. Who's going to read through all of those and actually go through all of them, right? The internet's crazy, right?
Yeah.
There's probably not enough people to man that. So of course there's going to be prioritization, and the bigger companies probably will have to, really actually get their act together.
And I mean, there could be some like patent style trolls that, some companies that, specialize in making money off stuff like this, right? That are actually the ones taking them to court, not necessarily the government directly. So, that's a real possibility. People always stand to try to figure out ways that they can shake down companies and sites for profit over, compliancy issues.
And the other thing too is, you could say like, I mean, we can always relate to what's happened in the past, right? So I know there was a big thing in Norway for around, accessibility and having, every site has to have this information. And then there was the cookie acceptance thing. So like the other side of this, the other side of this thing though is like, what is the, I'm interested in what is like the best UI, or what is the best way to show this to users, right? Where will we go? Where, the best UI for entering website is like this thing where we're getting used to. Is it going to be everyone has their own, or is it going to be kind of like a, again, best practices for GDPR acceptance and updates and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
I saw a funny a picture on, I think it was on Twitter, of what, basically websites are going to look like after GDPR is implemented. And it was like a mobile device. And, the first, banner across the top covering about a third of the screen was like, we use cookies, do you accept that? Whatever. Yes. And the second one was like the GDPR compliancy. This site's GDPR. Do you consent? Yes. And the third one was like sign up for an email. But basically with all three things, like the entire web page is covered. Like there's nothing but these notifications that they have to present. And it's like, is that, to your point, is that the experience, especially on mobile, that we're in store for, like that's not a good, that's my terrible concern. Experience.
And my concern is like we have this in life, right? So for example, a lot in the States, a lot of laws around things where like, if I want to, before Airbnb came around, like if you were going to go stay at somebody's house that was like an apartment, you'd sign, you go through all the paperwork and sign all these things because to cover them for, for legality stuff, right? Legal stuff. And, getting in, Airbnb or, you get an Uber, all these things, you really don't have this experience of like getting thrown, sign this, accept this, right? So it hopefully doesn't change the internet experience is what I was going to say. By the time we actually get where we want to get to. And I don't think so. I think there will be, people will think of clever ways and a nice experience, but I think it could be ugly in the beginning.
Well, it's like the cookie compliancy thing. Like in the States, you forget about that, right? But as soon as you travel overseas, you're quickly reminded, like, oh, because literally every site you visit has that cookie compliancy like pop up that you have to accept or X out of or whatever. Like every site, and I always forget that. And I go to Europe, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a thing. If you're over here, you're going to see it everywhere, So, but we don't see that in the States because we don't have that mandate. So.
No. And I don't even read them. Like the UI for that is like, here's the X button, click it.
No, I don't want whatever you're selling me. I don't want it. I don't care what it is. I don't want it.
Get it out.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. There's still got a couple months. If you're this is the first you've heard of it or you're curious, just do a search for GDPR. A lot of information out there. A lot of information.
I know like WordPress core specifically and kind of I don't know which one it's under, but there is a pretty good team around this behind WordPress to at least make WordPress GDPR compliant.
And there's a hosting companies also. There's some compliancy there. So if make sure you talk with your host. I know we've been talking with a number of them, and they are assuring us that they will be fully compliant by the deadline. So make sure you talk to your host and get their kind of stance on GDPR as well. But this is definitely something that if you're in the world of the web, you need to know what's going on and make sure you don't put yourself in a bad position around.
And the
GDPR.
other thing is like it's definitely happening, right? So
yeah, it's happening, and you got about 2 months, so it's not going anywhere. Cool, man. Let's get on. I didn't use my bell last time. It was such a smooth.
No, I had a pretty good segue. It was pretty good, actually.
I have no idea how to segue into this one, but I want to talk about crypto because Scott, you've been in the crypto scene a little bit, and I know you're. I guess you'd probably consider yourself maybe a hobbyist, but I know you know quite a bit about it. I've been really digging into crypto, specifically around cryptocurrencies and blockchain. For a little while now, and it's just it's beyond the buzz of get rich quick and the surges and stuff we saw over the holidays. I think just the technology behind it is fascinating, around kind of cryptocurrencies, around the idea of how they work around blockchain. But why don't you tell me a little bit about why don't we start with maybe how you got into it, and then maybe some of the things you're doing today, because I think you've even been playing around with mining cryptocurrency a little bit, which is an area that I don't know that much about. So I'm anxious to hear.
No. So I would say since WordPress, crypto is probably the second thing I've actually kind of gotten into and consider myself a fanboy, or at least I enjoy it and I can find the time to look into it and dabble around. And I did get into kind of the typical kind of thing, but I think I maybe took it quite a bit far. And,
as soon as you start spinning up servers, that's a fair statement.
and to my surprise, there's a ton of people around me. That's okay. There's like this fine line. Everyone knows what you could say what's cryptocurrency, and most people think Bitcoin, and everyone knows what that is to an extent. But there's a very fine line of, after that line, nobody knows anything else, right? But even there, like, I think a lot of people, even in our world, you know, at least on the web and doing kind of web technology stuff, we can have this conversation because everyone is somehow knows what it is and has dabbled in it and has interest in it, at least. So how I started, I guess you could say, was like, I guess, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, kind of when Bitcoin was starting. I looked into it. I signed up for, you know, very basic, signed up for a Coinbase account. I never bought anything. And I sat on it for a long time until, I guess you could say, I would say probably around the hype of Bitcoin, really. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to look into this, and not just Bitcoin itself and maybe buying Bitcoin or even trading. Like, what other things are happening in here, and how does that relate to what I'm doing even with web?
So is this back over the holidays when you say the height
I
of
would
Bitcoin?
say, no, I would say like, not holidays, but maybe last August or September.
Okay.
So it was actually fun starting there. Then the holidays happening, which I think a lot of people quite enjoyed. And then, yeah. Anyway, so I mean, how I was figuring how I could tie it to like what I know, right? So, for example, I've been doing Raspberry Pi stuff for a long time. Doing a lot of stuff here at the co-working space. Then I looked into kind of how miners work, for example, outside of Bitcoin. Just how does the whole mining process work? And then, you know, started to buy miners off we don't have Craigslist here in Norway, but we have something called Finn. I just randomly bought a miner, an ASIC miner, that wasn't profitable, but I wanted to learn, understand how it worked, right? So these things run Raspberry Pis, for example, or like a kind of these ASIC miners run like it's called an Orange Pi. But anyway, I understood that. I could SSH into that. I could see how it works. I could see how it fires up the ASIC boards, for example. And I don't know. It was more of a curiosity thing. I was like, what is going on? And I can kind of dabble in it. So I bought a miner. It wasn't profitable. And then from there, we are now, you know, about 10 ASIC miners deep now, and doing a lot of fun stuff, actually. And it works, and it's really cool. And there isn't much of a learning curve if you can do what we do, actually, Brad, because it's somewhat similar to server setup and things like that, right? So I got a good understanding after I started to dabble in setting up my own kind of miners, how that works, then going kind of all in. And then I went back to actually, I would say, like looking at altcoins and trading and stuff like that when the holidays happened, because there was a lot of really cool, you know, fun and exciting stuff happening, right? The market went crazy and stuff like that. And there's just a lot of fun stuff around it. I mean, even like these auto traders that are on Node.js, for example, how does that work? Spin your own up, connect to, you know, some of the big exchanges out there. There's a lot of really cool things you can get into, even if you're not making money. I think a lot of people just like, oh, I want to make a lot of money, you know, right? But it's the technology behind it that's so cool. And I think that's why, you know, the next thing we would talk about is the blockchain technology. But there's a lot of really cool technology behind this stuff. And again, everyone knows what Bitcoin is and stuff like that. But once you start playing around with it, this stuff's not going away.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you're into technology, and you know, I think this is naturally a really interesting field to dig into, because, like you said, most people, at least certainly most techies, understand Bitcoin at kind of a high level. But yeah, once you really start peeling back the layers to truly understand how it works, it's crazy. It's fascinating, and it's just an endless amount of information. Like, you know, I still wouldn't consider myself. I'm certainly not an expert. I don't even know if I can consider myself with like average knowledge around it, but I you know, I get the concepts and I understand it. But there's a lot to learn.
Our WordPress journey, part 2.
yeah. This is like when, you know, WordPress had like, you know, 9% usage across. That's about where we're at. But yeah, it's fascinating. You know, the technology behind it. It's fun to kind of watch it. You certainly. You know, doing it from the financial standpoint is what everybody knows about, but when you really dig into blockchain, that is the actual, that is the stuff that really gets me geeking out, because blockchain technology is, in my mind, it's the future of any and all transactions that will transpire. Will be at some point, you know, probably in our lifetime, will be through blockchain, which a lot of people know it because of Bitcoin. And, you know, some of the other coins and some of the altcoins and stuff, but it's more than just that. Like, it's an actual really amazing system for tracking and authenticating transactions of anything, any kind of transaction, not just financial. Do you want to take a stab at kind of explaining blockchain in 30 seconds?
So I'm actually not the best at actually kind of the blockchain itself, and what's, how that started, what it's doing, and where it's going. So I'm gonna point that back on you, actually, Brad.
All right.
Because I will probably ramble on it.
I mean, because one of the reasons I started really digging into this too is because most of us out there probably listen to the show. We're like the tech people in our family and friends, right?
Oh.
So our friends and family just assume, oh, like you're into computers, you know everything about computers. Like, explain Bitcoin to me or explain blockchain. You know what I mean? So like, there's a bunch of guys at the gym talking about blockchain, and I'm like, I didn't want to jump in, guys. I was wanting to hear how they describe it and how they understood it, and it was surprisingly pretty close, but it was just funny the way they did it. But basically, I mean, blockchain, you think about it's a chain of blocks, right? Okay, that makes sense. And each block is a transaction, and that block contains a few pieces of data, one being who it's coming from, one being who it's going to, and one being the amount of that transaction, or whatever the transaction is, the information about that transaction. As well as it also relates back to like the previous block, and that's essentially how they're chained. So at the core of the block, that is a block. It's a transaction. It has a very minimal amount of data, just the bare necessities to make a transaction. Who from, who to, what they're sending, and then the previous block, so that it can kind of relate into that chain. So if you think about it like that, it does kind of make sense, right? At the very basic form. Now, certainly you can dig into kind of way more about blockchain than just that, but from a high level, that's what it is. And I think that's what really fascinates me in terms of how companies and people throughout the world are starting to utilize blockchain technology for anything. I actually have a little clip I want to play. I watched this cool presentation over the weekend, and I'll get it up on the website in the show notes. But part of the presentation is this engineer from IBM, and she played this video that I'm going to play here. It's Frank Yanis, who is Walmart's vice president of food and safety. And it's just a quick minute where he talks about how Walmart and IBM are working together to bring some blockchain into their technologies tags. So here we go.
When there's a food event or a food scare, what you want to do is you want to be fast, but you want to be right. That food product is guilty until proven innocent. We at Walmart will actually pull all the product until we know what is the implicated product, and we can put the safe product back out. And so imagine if we could pinpoint with certainty within minutes, not days, that it was the implicated product. Walmart and IBM are working to make that a reality. If you think about the food system, it's pretty complex. It involves farmers, processors, distributors. And the way traceability is done today, each segment of the food system does it their own way. Most actually do it on paper or on systems that don't speak to each other. And so you can never have a full view of what's happening in the food system. What we hope to do with blockchain is bring all food safety system stakeholders and collaborate so that we do it one best way. We can do it very quickly and efficiently.
So this is crazy cool, because this is not something I initially had any inkling that blockchain would be a part, that they could use blockchain for. But when you think about it, it makes absolute sense. So essentially what he's saying is, that you go all the way to the farm where people are growing food, right? And they grow the food, they harvest it, and then they're going to sell it. And there's all these different kind of handoff transactions that happen all the way up until it gets to the shelf of a Walmart or a grocery store. The challenge they have is when something goes bad. If there is a E. coli outbreak in the spinach, right? They don't know what spinach. They just know some spinach in some of their stores have gotten people sick. So right now the process is they'll pull all the spinach across every store and every Walmart in the entire world, because they don't know what spinach is tainted. But if they did the transaction from the farm all the way up to Walmart with blockchain, literally every transaction would have a block in a public ledger. Like you said, within minutes, they could pinpoint and say, this spinach at this store that got this person sick came from this farm in Idaho. And who else has spinach from that farm in Idaho? Get it off the shelves immediately. So it's absolutely, it's amazing, and makes complete sense. So stuff like that is what really excites me, of how people are starting to use, huge companies are really investing tons of money in blockchain, and how it can really, make their process top to bottom way more efficient.
And I think it's so the reason I dodged the question before is because I could ramble on, and blockchain is and crypto is something that again I'm all over the place in. I don't know a lot, but I am all over the place in. And mostly it's like a lot of conversations that I'm having, and I think there is kind of this, all of the kind of negativity or it's not going to work is around the use cases we see today, right? And I feel that you could say that a lot of these things we see for like Facebook ads, I know they pulled them off, but everywhere we're going, we're seeing ICO ads, right? So the idea of somebody trying to make their own coin. And then, it almost feels very Kickstarter in a way, right? It's like all these Kickstarter videos about, this is what we plan on doing.
We're revolutionized. Our coin's the winner.
But I think that's, the kind of, the emotional side of us as humans is that we're like, that's just you trying to, basically make something that you don't have nothing, there's nothing behind it. And that is the case. There's a ton of things that have nothing behind it, but that's not the technology, right? That's people trying to use the technology. So it's really interesting when you see like Walmart come into it, or a lot of these other use cases that I've seen written about, Brad, is, even voting. How can blockchain change the whole voting system, right?
Yep.
And you would say, 5 years ago, without blockchain, voting on the internet, that's impossible. That's crazy, right? But something like, take the kind of, it's the most, valid thing we've ever come up with in technology with transactions, right? So kind of voting is a transaction, and if there is no middleman and we can somehow verify it, and the whole process of where it started and where it went, it's the best way that we can even do like voting, right? For whatever. And that's a really interesting use case that I think we'll see happen. I don't know when, but blockchain is a really good fit for that.
Well, it's the accountability around it, right? Because that is the strength and genius of blockchain, because it essentially every transaction is logged in a public ledger, and that public ledger is distributed across all computers that are part of that chain that are essentially processing it. So it's not a single point of failure. There's not a single point of being hacked or being tampered with. If you were to tamper with one computer's public ledger, all the other computers would invalidate that and say, no, that's not right. That doesn't match our ledger. That's not right. Somebody hacked that. It's garbage. Whereas now there's a single point of failure. And I mean, you get into voting, that's a whole can of worms there, because we're not even doing it in the US. We're not even doing it the same from state to state. Every state's different. So like you couldn't even roll it out right now, unless we got on some, federal level voting system. But I agree. Like, I think the accountability around it is what makes it such a unique technology. And honestly, the more and more I read about blockchain, I mean, this is one of the biggest advances in technology, in a new type of technology than we've seen in a while. This is exciting stuff, and it will be here forever.
And it covers so much thing, right? Like I said, some people are interested in kind of the financial gains or just playing around with trading like they would on the stock market. Then other people are interested in the actual technology behind it and how it doesn't affect really even banking or money, right? So the Walmart thing's really cool. There's a bunch of other things. I know Sia Coin, for example, is one of these coins that is specifically trying to do this, and there's a few other ones who are trying to compete with something like AWS and S3, and pushing your content through a blockchain and having it accessible in all over the world, like how you would on AWS and S3, but do it through the blockchain and for really cheap prices and powered by decentralized network. Again, will that happen? I don't know, but somebody's thinking outside the box, other than just a transactional coin that they can use on at the store. So it's quite cool.
Just a few days ago, there was a report about the first real estate transaction in the U.S. That was recorded in blockchain. It happened in Vermont. There's a startup or a new company called, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're called Proppy. No. And they actually have, guess what, their own coin. It's under the PRO tag, but the company's called Proppy. And essentially you can buy, real estate all over the world and in some select cities. But they actually recorded the real estate transaction in the Ethereum blockchain, the public blockchain. And that is the first official record of it in the United States. So, we're starting to see, even at a very small level, but we're starting to see people do this. And the more, this is the first one. And like the actual, quote within the article says, this really opens the door for the other 49 states to kind of look what we did. And they can essentially use that as a template to kind of get going on their own. So yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of this stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. And then just a side note, like that's what Ethereum itself, right? A lot of, once you get past the conversation of, do you know what blockchain is or crypto is, a lot of people, it stops. So, Ethereum, what it's really strong for and what it's good at is the idea of these kind of smart contracts. They're trying to, at least the technology behind Ethereum is trying to do what you just said, right? So selling a house or selling a car or selling something that's quite expensive and having that be kind of that contract made without a middleman, right? So it's really cool. Another thing too is like you get these things around coins, right? So you could say, this company has a coin. And essentially, I guess you could say that is just kind of their, a way for you to buy a share into that company. And the cool thing with this decentralized crypto thing is that, you as a private individual, Brad, you can just say, hey, I want a share of that company, right? Which is represented in a coin. That's the kind of some of these differences between, what's a coin or a token, you could say. They probably have a token and not a coin.
Yeah.
And a token is like a representation of in a way it is cryptocurrency, but it is more like of a share. And you can just buy them and you can sell them on your own, right? A lot of exchanges today, if you want to buy a share for a company, it's quite complicated. All these things you need to sign. You need to get into it, and then you need, it closes. And then, for example, if you want to sell, maybe you can't sell instantly. Like you as an individual have a lot of freedom now to take part in or invest in a company and get out of it with these tokens, which is quite cool.
Get those tokens.
Get them. It's interesting. It's crazy right now.
It is. I actually just watched.
People are saying blockchain is, it's not going to work because a lot of people are just watching the news and seeing the price of Bitcoin, but that's not. They're kind of decoupled, right? The technology and how
well, that's the thing. Bitcoin is cryptocurrency, and that's what everyone knows. And a blockchain is just for most people, the non-techies that don't really understand it. Blockchain is just something that's a part of Bitcoin, but they don't really know how or why. When blockchain is the underlying technology that could be used for a lot of other stuff, not just Bitcoin. And to the point of people making, well, Bitcoin's not going to work, and look at it dropping. It's like, well, it's still up like how many 1,000% like since same time last year. So
the example you said, like Walmart's getting behind it. A lot of companies, who knows what they're working on right now, and we're going to start seeing some big things with blockchain. Yeah,
no, I do agree that obviously all the altcoins and cryptos, like there's hundreds. I think there's over 1,000 different altcoins out there that you can buy and,
that's crazy,
and sell. And obviously I think there is a bubble to that. I think there's going to be some clear winners that come out of this, but I don't think cryptocurrency is going to go away. I know blockchain is not going to go away. Blockchain is here to stay, and it's only going to get more popular. But I really do believe that Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin and maybe some of the others like Ripple or Stellar, things like that, working more with the bank and financial institutions. Like I do think there's something there, and I don't think they're going to go away. I think it's a great way to, I do feel strongly that they are going to be seen as legit currencies, in the future. So, but it is fascinating.
And you could say, we don't know what it looks like, but that technology for even like you running a company, Brad, and, when I ran a company and paying, for example, some of the employees that we had who lived in different countries, like that process to send somebody a monthly paycheck that is in another country, right? Then I have to go to the local bank and I have to fill all these things out manually, and then they need to call somebody up, and then they need to make sure it happens and verify it. And then, it takes, just the idea of those things taking
transactional costs for the bank, I'm sure there was some additional costs for that. And it takes days versus you could just send them Bitcoin instantly and they could cash it out and go on their way.
So the banks are probably even, they're saying that maybe, I have this feeling like the local banks here, and there's a lot of articles in Norway and even internationally in the States that the banks are against it, but they're going to figure out a way to use it because it just makes what they're doing way better.
Well, banks are always going to be against stuff like this until they can figure out how to make money, right? And that's like any big company's got to be against something usually until they can figure out anything that can disrupt their business. They'll be against it until they can figure out how to make money with it, right? So. That's to be expected, but there are some cryptocurrencies focusing solely on banks like Ripple and Stellar. So I do think there is something to that, and especially like you said, cross country transactions. Right now it's a huge pain in the ass, but this would really simplify it. So crypto's hot. I actually found this interesting article about domains that are related to cryptocurrency and what they've been selling for. So tokens.com, you mentioned tokens, that sold for 500,000 back in February, 500,000, not bad for tokens. Cryptoworld.com, 195,000. That seems high for cryptoworld.com. ETH. What do you think? ETH.com is a 3-letter domain. And obviously that's the, what do they call it? A symbol or tag for Ethereum.
Oh.
ETH.com. $2 million. Sold for
wow.
$2 million. But they're crypto.com, owned by a guy named Matt Blaze, which actually lives here in the Philadelphia area, owns it. And he has a little bit of text on there, links out to some of his other stuff. And he is refusing to sell. He's does not want to sell, has no interest in selling, even though this is probably easily a few $1 million domain name at the least. Certainly right now, kind of as crypto is very hot topic, but he is he's actually not into cryptocurrency. He's into cryptography. So, and they're all saying he's kind of their last hope to keep that separated. But pretty interesting, and I think that this type of stuff just speaks to the how popular and how how many people are interested in cryptocurrencies right now.
And I think so just to tie back to kind of the beginning, Brad, you and I talked about, like, we didn't know we were both into crypto until randomly it was like, I don't know, I saw something on Facebook. Oh, hey, I think you can have a lot of conversations about, like, so for some reason, at least crypto it's not like an opening conversation, but everybody I know somehow, like, after weeks or months of knowing them, they're into it as well. So I think everyone around us is into it. Just they don't talk about it until they find out that it's something that you're in common together.
Yeah, and it's one of those topics, like, you can feel real stupid about it. Like, even after hours and hours and hours of reading and digging and exploring, you'll still feel like, I really don't understand what the hell's going on, So I think it can be a little intimidating, kind of putting yourself out there, like, oh yeah, Bitcoin, like, yeah, it's easy to sound smart, with the guys at the gym or the family, around Christmas. Like, of course you just throw out words like blockchain and they're like, whoa. But yeah, so I think there is a little bit of intimidation factor because there's so much there, but it is fun to geek out with and talk about and see what people are looking at or how they're using it. Like, I experiment, I buy and sell some coins here and there on a very small scale, but it's a fun topic to kind of dig in and read about and really to see how other people are using it outside the financial side. That's what really piques my interest.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it's a lot in common, but I never had an interest in watching anything on TV around NASDAQ and the stock exchange and how these things work. And now, like 6-8 months, following all of these, I don't know anything, but at least I'm interested in it. So now when I watch, stuff about the market in the States or anywhere else, I kind of get it. Not that I'm interested in it, but something about crypto, because it was so close to web and like internet technology and stuff like that. I'm at least able to read things in the newspaper about economy and the stock market, et cetera, and futures and stuff like that. And it's not like a black hole.
Yeah.
And the other thing for the listeners, actually, my advice is, if you are to get into it, I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of just, there is a big unknown, so you just start buying stuff. But there's a lot of things you can get into with just reading about, again, it sounds cliche, we all know about this, but these white papers you can read about, or the company, what they're trying to do. And a lot of it, there are a lot of cool companies that have big plans with blockchain itself and the idea of a token, for example. And it is cool to get not only just throwing money or investing in that, the idea that maybe I'll make it rich with this altcoin, but like you do with other companies, you kind of like the company, you like what they're doing, you like their plans, you believe in the technology. And then when you do actually say buy some tokens or coins, there's at least some kind of reason why you're doing it. And I think that's quite cool. So I'm trying to do that now. If I do get into buying some tokens or coins on an exchange, at least read a little bit about what you're buying into, because otherwise it is like gambling or like the slot machine in a way.
Yeah, I mean, my advice is obviously don't spend what you can't afford to lose. Like any kind of investment or purchase, if you can't afford to lose it, don't spend it. But if you have a little bit and you want to experiment and play, I look at this type of stuff. If I'm looking at it from a financial investment standpoint, I look at it more long term, and I think that's the way you have to look at it. Like, if you're trying to get in here and dump a bunch of money in, and cash out on Friday and try to make a bunch of money, you're going to be playing it more like stocks. And if that's the game you want to be in, then you should probably be buying and selling stocks. Where crypto, I think the actual the hodl or the crypto terminology there, but basically hold on to it, like buy it and hold on to it for the long term. And I'm talking years. You know, I bought some Bitcoin when I didn't even know what the hell it was. And then when it shot up, all of a sudden, you know, my investment of $100 is now worth thousands of dollars, even more now. So, and that was a couple years ago, you know, so it's not, you know, I wouldn't look at it like you want overnight riches.
No.
Look at it more of a long-term strategy if you are going at it from an investment standpoint. But it is fun. Read out there. Actually, the last bit I'll leave you with is John Oliver. If you watch his show Last Week Tonight, which is really funny on HBO, and there's clips on YouTube and everything, he had a whole segment on cryptocurrency a couple days ago. And it's actually pretty enlightening. If you don't know anything about crypto, he kind of walks you through what it is. But it's actually a really good kind of primer and explanation of cryptocurrencies, blockchain, Bitcoin, some of the others. It's really good. So just look for John Oliver and crypto, and it'll pop right up. But yeah, man, we'll check back in a few months, a few years, see how those
interesting
servers
one
are going.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. And I was going to say the other, just for you, Brad, and the listeners, a really cool thing that I did read and kind of went a little bit deeper into was the fork of Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, for example. Like most people just view that as a word and they don't know about why that happened and the community behind it and the different technology. It's a really cool story, actually. There's a lot of cool videos. I'm going to send you one after the show.
Yeah, do it, because I honestly don't know a lot of that backstory. I do know that I have Bitcoin Cash now because they matched. You basically, because of that split, if you own Bitcoin before it or something like, they match the Bitcoin Cash amount.
Yep.
I don't know, but I got
actually, it's just the fork, right? So that chain was forked, and you have it in both places, actually.
Yeah, which is cool. So it's
cool.
like I overnight, you know, made some more money. It's good stuff, though. But we'll definitely be talking about more crypto and blockchain on this show. If you're listening, you have any interesting articles.
If there's any more crypto ones in the future,
I'll let you know. Blockchain's not going away, so I'm excited. You know, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how much it's impacting us on a more daily basis, and I really think it will be across everything we do with transactions. I think there's going to start being blockchain elements in our daily lives. So cool, man. Well, let's go ahead and wrap it up. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you online?
Best place is probably on Twitter, so at Scott Basgaard on Twitter. That's it. My website is down, but I am trying to get more active on Twitter. And actually, I think that's how I, got in touch with you and found out about the show and asked if I could join. So Twitter is the best place to find me. Otherwise, I'm in the middle of nowhere in Norway.
Middle of nowhere in Norway. Well, you guys had a good showing at the Winter Olympics this year. I think you won the medal count, didn't you, Norway? They end up winning. Yeah, probably. You guys dominated.
It's that sport that is unheard of in the States, cross country skiing.
Yeah, that's not a really big one here. We have some people do it, but certainly not one of the bigger ones. But cool, man. Definitely appreciate you coming on, Scott. Looking forward to seeing you hopefully in the near future. That's a wrap.
Have fun in Miami.
Yes, sir. I will actually be in Miami this weekend. So I'm going to WordCamp Miami. I'm leaving tomorrow, which will be Thursday. So if you're around this weekend, track me down. I'll be either at the event or on a beach getting burnt because I haven't seen the sun in a long time. I'm actually looking at snow out my window right now. So Miami will be a nice change for a couple of days. Looking good. So this is episode 3 of Lunch with Brad. Check out the website, lunchwithbrad.com. And again, you can interact with the show at the hashtag lunchwithbrad. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for a live episode of Lunch with Brad. Lunch with Brad.
It is pretty catchy.
Lunch with Brad. This will be in your head the rest of the day. Lunch with Brad. Lunch with Brad.